Hi, everyone. This is Jose Palomino with another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. And our guest today is Bill Caskey of BillCaskey.com. And Bill is a master, a true black belt in the area of sales, sales development, sales excellence. And we're going to learn about why caring too much about a deal is exactly the opposite of what you should do if you want to close more business. So for that, and I hope that got your attention, for that and much more, let's welcome Bill to our show. Well, welcome, Bill, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Joe, glad to be here, my friend.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. So glad that you could be here because we're going to talk about some really, I think, deep waters here on a topic that's very near and dear to my heart in the broad area of sales and strategic selling. But, Bill, just for our audience, who do you primarily focus on helping and what do you do for them?
Okay. I've got two constituents. I've got the VP of sales or the CEO where I work with their sales teams. And typically I work with them for 6 months to a year, helping them everything from lead generation to closing skills. Some of it is skill sets, some of it is social media, but it's really all about how do we engage more clients. The other element is I work with a group of high achievers. I've got a program just for people who are in the 6-digit range and higher. And that's a private group of people. And I open that up from time to time. So those are my two constituents. The same outcome, though: results, better lead gen, better sales process management, better personal growth.
Okay, and I know you didn't wake up yesterday to decide to do this. You've been doing this a little while. And the reason I just give that perspective for our listeners because of what I'm going to ask you next, which is what has changed. If we look at a time horizon of the last, let's say, 10 years, what has changed in the world of selling?
Well, a lot has changed in the last 18 months, but if you rewind 10 years, I think obviously the internet and digital has had a huge impact on the sales force of today. Um, and the saying is that the prospect, if they're searching for something, is 75% of the way down the sales cycle before you show up as a sales professional. So many times you have to undo what they have learned because sometimes what they've learned on the internet is not appropriate, not right. And so I think that the move to digital, and I think a lot of organizations are reluctant to believe that. They still believe that, well, they reached out to us, so that we must have been the first people they called. And it's naive. And so I think that's the biggest thing that's changed. And it's this whole idea of what's the power structure? There is a power structure that typically happens when you or I make a cold call on someone to try to get an appointment or have a discussion. And the power struggle is this: they own you. They have the power because they have the money, they have the stroke of the pen. And I'm trying to change that. I don't think the power should be only in the hands of the prospect. I think the sales professional and the selling organization has every bit as much power because they have the solution to the problem that the prospect has. And so part of my work with people and I think part of the power structure is in our own mind. I think a lot of salespeople feel like, well, I'm selling something. They own me because they can either pay me or not. And that's just not true. That's just not true. And so trying to change our own beliefs about that is a challenge. But once people start to embrace, yeah, you know what? I have some freaking good solutions here. Why am I always the one chasing and trying to hunt down
Right.
prospects?
Right. Well, what's interesting about that, and you talked about obviously digital change and that 75% down the funnel that's been, certainly been documented, right? So for somebody, and it's interesting that you say there's still people that don't quite believe it yet, and I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. You better start believing it. But what you're one of the first people I've talked to that said, and part of your job then is to assess where they may have been miseducated and kind of recalibrate some of the thinking around how they're processing that decision, that buying decision. You're not just there to be an order taker, I guess is what it comes down to.
No, and part of that is you have to establish pretty good rapport. I think this rapport thing was overworked in the 70s or 80s. Is that your stuffed fish on the wall, that kind of stuff? Oh, that's a nice shirt you have on there, Joe. I think rapport is a whole lot different than that today. And I think you have to meet the customer where they are. And if they are in the final choosing of a vendor, you might not want to play that game.
Mm-hmm.
But not knowing that, again, your head's in the sand. And so you're going on thinking, you're going back to your manager saying, oh man, we got to we got an opportunity here. And then we close 12% of those and we can't figure out why. And then we work on stuff like, well, our website's not good enough and our brochure's not good enough. Had nothing to do with that.
Or the
The
product, if
prospect
only we had
or the
feature
yeah,
X. Right.
yeah.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with you never took control of the process. You never were in rapport enough with the prospect to even for them to allow you to take control. And so it becomes an arm wrestling match. And I think it's time to get out of that. I just, it's just time to get out.
So interesting. So that arm wrestling match, which if you really go into it with that perspective, it's only really a lose win ever, right? At that point.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to be on the winning side of that because you're not, at the end they do have the checkbook and
They
so
do
on.
have a checkbook,
Right.
and you want what they have more than they want what you have. And whenever that's the dynamic, you're a loser. I don't mean you're a loser from a human being standpoint, but you will lose that battle because you want what they have, money. They don't want what you have, solution, as much as you want their money. And so it's a cockeyed dynamic all the way through. And again, it's not that difficult to change it. It's just that you have to be aware that that's happening, or you'll get sucked into it.
So in many of the companies in the mid market, the small to mid market, right?
Yeah.
Let's say $5 to $50 million,
Which is where I typically work. Yeah.
Well, a lot of times they may have a couple of sales reps. They've often promoted people who have deep technical knowledge about the product or service that they do, but not really a lot of sales acumen in any way, right? Maybe and not necessarily generational either. It's just they feel comforted by the person who in a large organization would be a sales engineer, and they think, okay, that person really knows our stuff and he knows this stuff. But what you're talking about here is somehow creating a connection with the prospect so that you can turn around that, you're 75% down, they want to talk to you. How do you shift that? So if you're that business owner saying, yeah, that's me, I got 2 or 3 guys, just like guys and gals, just like what you're describing, Jose. How do I teach them this? How do I get them to think this way?
Well, it is a thinking problem. It is first a thinking problem. So you're exactly right. Because I think what we end up defaulting to is, well, let's just go be more persuasive, or let's just go say this instead of that, or that instead of this. And so it is a thinking problem. The first step, I believe, is becoming aware of the game you're in. You are in a game where everybody's looking for power. The prospect's looking for it, you're looking for it. So there's one way. This is going to sound weird, and I'm sorry I called you Joe earlier, Jose. Sorry about that. There's one way to establish the power, and that's to detach from the outcomes. Because if I'm too invested in the outcome, if I want this thing really bad, and I may put on the show like I really don't, but if deep down I want this deal, I'm attached to the outcome, and I have no options then. I'm not free to choose, do I pursue or do I not pursue? And this is heresy for some sales coaches, this idea of detaching from the outcomes. I will tell you, it's the most powerful thing you can give to one of your sales engineers or salespeople is giving them the allowing them to detach and to not work with people. And guess what happens when you're detached? You're free. You're free to say the right things, do the right things, or you're free to walk away because it's just not a good client. But when when we're attached to everything, that governs everything we do.
But I need this deal to make my number this quarter.
Yeah. And people say, well, I can do that at the first of the quarter. I can't do that in the last 2 weeks. And I'm like, wait a minute. This has nothing to do with you. The question is the customer going to buy less because you're eager and you're attached and you need the business? Is the customer going to buy if you're eager and attached? Of course not. They're not going to buy the way they would if they really believe you're there for them and you're detached from the outcome and your intention is about problem solving and value creation and value selling. But our minds play games on us, especially in the last part of the quarter. I can have a guy who's just awesome in the first 2 months. Third month comes, quarter ends, and he turns into an animal. And I'm like, you were doing so well. Why'd you change? You were on pace. Now you're changing your whole approach. And so that would be the first thing I would say as an owner is you have to get your team to embrace this detachment philosophy. And that's hard because that's not the way we're wired.
No, it isn't. And, sales managers who, especially in large organizations, which would be a little different problem, but the pressure rolls downhill like at every stage of management till finally the poor rep in the field. He's getting the full weight of like 5 layers of executives leaning on him.
And they're all shoving pressure down till it gets to him or her. Yeah. Yeah. But I think, what I found is I just started working with a software consultant here, does apps and Salesforce implementation. And he buys into it totally. His people were reluctant, but once I told him about detachment, he goes, "Oh yeah, we don't want to work with people who aren't a fit." And I said, "Well, you got to tell your people that because they think you want to work with everybody." Right. So I think CEOs and presidents kind of automatically think that way because that's how they got to where they are. And once you put it in the right terms, I think you can teach your salespeople how to do it. Doesn't mean walk away from good deals. It does not mean lay in bed and wait for the phone to ring or for the bank to tell you just got wired $1 million. It's a healthy form of detachment where I'm here to find out what your issues are, Mr. Prospect. You're going to find out for me what I do. At the end, we can make a logical decision about does it make sense to go further or not. If it doesn't, that's totally okay. I've got other people I can call on. And that whole spirit, I don't even call it an attitude. It's the spirit gives you just tremendous strength.
Well, it really leans into, in a significant way, showing up with much more integrity. Because one of the things salespeople always say, like the words have to come out of your mouth if you're going to move business. I think I can solve your problem. Well, if I come at it from just what you're discussing here, Bill, if I come at it too attached to the outcome, I might say that and not really mean it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But buyers are smart people too. They went to buying school. Just like you went to sales school, they went to buying school, and so they're thinking. I don't think this guy's thinking about how it benefits or would hurt me if it's the wrong decision. He just wants to close the deal, and they smell that right away.
Yeah, the sniff test, as I call it.
Okay.
I mean, you've probably been in a buying situation. I was in one about 2 weeks ago where I'm getting ready to launch another podcast for VPs of sales, and I was talking to this gentleman who is a podcast consultant. And he was really good, great guy. We're probably going to work with him. But there were a couple times when he was asking me questions. He was so close to finding what my real pain was, but he couldn't ask that next question. He couldn't do it. And so then he reverted back to, well, let me tell you what we can do for you. And I felt as a buyer, I felt like, oh God, I wanted so bad to tell him, but I kind of felt like, well, he needs to ask me. And so if your buyer leaves one of your I don't mean yours, but one of sales person listening, one of their meetings feeling empty, that's probably because you didn't ask the right question. You didn't get deep enough. You didn't really help him or her connect your solution to their problem, because if their problem is not on the table and it's not out there in the open, they can't connect the dots.
And the other side of that too is if you ask the right questions, it seems to me, Bill, you can often help clarify the problem for the prospect. They may have a fuzzy, I think I need help in this category. That's why I'm meeting with you, but it's not crystal. And people rarely move forward, in my experience, when they're fuzzy.
No. I'm going to draw, I don't know if this is a video interview or not.
Yeah, it is.
It's the traditional iceberg.
Okay.
And the iceberg above the water is all the things the prospect knows are wrong with their situation. So it's 20% above the water. That's the presenting knowledge. Mm-hmm. So when you ask a question, they will know how to answer everything above the water. The problem is most of their pain is below the surface. They don't even know what it is. So you, as a sales professional, as a business owner, need to be an excavator to lower the water line so that those problems can be exposed, and you're doing them a favor. You're not trying to manipulate. This is not about manipulation. It's about clarity.
Well, I had a situation once a couple of years ago. It was interesting. It was almost an opposite situation where you also need buyers that are willing to engage with that.
To go there. Yep.
Right. So I remember going into a meeting. It was a big meeting, potentially a very big engagement. And there was a meeting with the entire executive suite. And the sponsor, who really wanted to work with me, was there. But then all of a sudden the CEO stood up. I was 2 minutes into just starting the dialogue. And he says, enough with that. What are you offering? And he put me in a box to come up with pitch. And my style is always, I'd rather understand first before I start telling you anything, because I don't know if what I offer is going to help you or not.
Perfect.
And it left me. It was like an hour beatdown. It wasn't pleasant, right? And it left me feeling so unsettled, and nothing came of it because at that point there's nothing. So had I really been thinking about this mindset, I might have called time out earlier in that conversation and said, look, it's clear this isn't working well. Would you recommend somebody be that bold?
You mean
If I had called
if it
time out
happened to you,
on
yeah, you
and
called
say,
time out.
listen, this is just not how it's supposed to, you're not going to get value from me if, approaching it this way. Would you, so I guess my question is, how bold can a salesperson be, practically speaking, in these kind of situations?
If they're detached, they can do that. If they're not, they can't, because they probably worked hard. You probably worked a little bit to get in front of that group.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot writing on it, and you're feeling, man, boy, if this close, you're not saying that out loud, but oh, this is going to have a nice Christmas. And so then now it's all about you, and you get it attached. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just our mind, it's our thoughts, it's our thinking that goes awry. And the fact is that you had nothing when you walked in, you had nothing when you left. So if you would have said, time out, that's not the way I work, uh, they might have thrown you out, or he might have said, fair enough. Okay. You don't know what he would have said.
Right.
Sounds like he might have led you out the door, which if that's all it took, you weren't going to get that deal anyway.
Well, yeah, the truer words are rarely spoken.
But you brought up another thing, Jose, and that is this team selling.
Mm-hmm.
And I get a lot of people calling me and saying, hey, you got to come in and work with our team. We have a team of 2 or 3 people that go in and call on prospects. And there's 2 or 3 of them. There's 2 or 3 of you. We're virtual. We're on Zoom or GoTo. And that's difficult. It's difficult to manage not only your own team, that's
Mm-hmm.
the toughest part, but also so all 6 of these people, and you as a sales professional are the MC. You're the master of ceremonies. You're the one that has to make it all work. If you see somebody in the corner of the screen and they're not paying any attention and they're a key influencer, you've got to call that. I don't mean call them out, you're not paying attention, but hey, John over there, tell me a little bit about what you've learned so far. I mean, bring them into the conversation. And most salespeople are not good MCs. They're not good masters of ceremonies. And so I think team selling and virtual combined make it very difficult to do that emceeing. If you're in the room with somebody, you can kind of see, and if they're looking at their watch,
Sure.
see them looking out the window. But team selling is very difficult today, and there's an act to it.
Wow, and it's not enough for you to have if you're that MC, to have that right detached mindset. It really helps that the entire team has it.
Exactly. And I always tell people, and I want the salesperson to be the host. I want them to be the producer, because a lot of times salespeople will say, well, no, I think our technical person should run the meeting. Oh, no, not that they're not valuable, but one person has to run the meeting, and that's you, because you can say, hey, John, can you comment on Jose's question? And Lucy, what did you think about that? Tell me. You can, and you're now you're the producer. You're the director, actually, not the producer.
Right.
You get the idea. Yeah.
No, that's great. So let's take this just a little bit towards the slightly smaller company.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they have one sales rep or somebody who's called a sales rep on the team. The owner has to do a lot of this kind of stuff as well. Is that they're not able to do sales full time. They're also helping run production. They're meeting with the bank. They have to do HR and so on. How do they incorporate some of these like best practices into when they do get called into sales situations?
This is the chief executive, you mean?
Yes, exactly.
Well, how do they do it? They have to know what their proper thinking should be. A lot of times, the chief executive will say, well, I don't really need training on selling because I'm the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is that you're not out there in the field 5 days a week making 30 calls. You're doing it once every couple of weeks. So your skills weaken. It's like the police officers will say, if you're not training with a gun at least every couple of weeks, you'll lose your skill. If 3 or 4 months go by and you're not training, and that's why they make these dudes, and ladies train all the time, because
Right.
in the heat of the moment, you better know what you're doing. And it's the same way with CEOs. It's like you need more training than the salesperson because you don't have a margin of error. you're out there once every couple of weeks or once a week, you've got to be really good. But I do think that a good CEO who's well trained and knows how to embrace some of these things is an awesome asset. I mean, technically, I've got one CEO who's with this this software company, and he is a stud. When he gets in front of people, he's just charming, and he's inquisitive, and he's a rock star. He doesn't lose too many, so his sales team needs to bring him in. He's the asset, and they need to say, go do the first call, and then say, hey, I'd like to bring Joel in. He's our owner. He's very knowledgeable about this stuff. Can we bring him? Yeah, sure. And Joel comes in and works his magic, and it's a done deal. So I think that's probably a better role for the CEO, to come in and be the closer. I don't like that term, but come in and be the champion, the guy who wasn't there the first meeting. So it's almost like the prospect has to remind them of what they want to do and what they want to accomplish. CEOs can be awesome assets there, but they have to know what they're doing.
Yeah, and right. No, and I've seen the opposite too, where you have sales team almost actively say, we don't want Joe on this call or Larry to come on, because, I think it does. You hit on the nail on the head though, which is that CEO is probably on who knows 2 or 3 or 5 sales appointments a month, versus a full-time sales professional who's doing that that in a week. So yeah, they're gonna and by the way, when they show up, it's high stakes. Right, it's like so everything's like set to 11.
Yeah, and the salesperson's a little shaky. It's like, oh, he's traveling with the boss today, and so he or she is the pitch of the voice goes up a little bit.
That's funny. That's great, Bill. We could keep talking about this all night, but we are just about out of time for this episode. It's been really a pleasure and a privilege to have you on the Revenue Throughput podcast.
Sorry, I mispronounced your first name.
Oh, don't even worry about it. As long as hey you, I respond. It's all good. So, but if somebody listening right now saying, "Wow, this guy Bill really is talking about something that's very interesting," how can they best connect with you, get a sense of what you are, and even reach out to you?
Yeah, appreciate it. 2 ways: BillCaskey.com, Caskey. A lot of free content there, and there's a way to connect with me. But I also just published something that I thought your listeners might want to get a copy of. It's called 5 Reasons You Don't Have Enough Clients. 5 Reasons You Don't Have Enough Clients. And it's built for salespeople, but CEOs and presidents can look at that. It includes some of the 4 or 5 things that we talked about today. Just go to 5reasonsclients.com, 5reasonsclients.com. It's also going to be on the website, so if you forget that, billcaskey.com. But I would say that's a good place to start. You can circulate it with your team. You can talk about it. You can have meetings and talk about how you can implement some of this stuff. So that would be my recommendation, Jose. Thanks.
Well, fantastic. Really appreciate that and making that available. And thank you for making yourself available for our show today.
All right. Good luck. Thanks, Jose.
Thank you.